I'm Lawrence Francis, host of Interpreting Wine, welcoming you to the Napa Valley Special Series 2023. Across these 5 episodes, we'll be exploring the Napa Valley scene through the lens of 5 very different wineries, giving us an incredibly detailed and up-to-date snapshot of this fascinating region via its people, land, and winemaking. Make sure you subscribe to Interpreting Wine wherever you're listening so you don't miss an episode. We continue the series today in the company of Nate Weis of Silver Oak Cellars. We hear Nate's origin story and he introduces us to the people at Silver Oak Cellars. He talks Napa Valley culture, mentors on the path to his current position, collaboration and competition, the increasing move towards abstinence. He gives us a property virtual tour, talks California Geology, Viticulture, and Premier Napa 2023. Enjoy.
So my name's Nate Weis. I'm the Vice President of Wine Growing for Silver Oak, Toomey, Timeless Napa Valley, and Ovid. So the Duncan family of wines, we call that. So the Duncan family are the founders of Silver Oak. 2022 was a really big year for us. It was our 50th anniversary, so a very, very special thing for the California wine business and something we're quite proud of as a family-owned winery in California. So two members of the family are still really active in the business. We have David Duncan, who's our proprietor and CEO, and we have Tim Duncan, who's our proprietor and chief revenue officer. So David kind of handles the operations and the vision, and Tim's bread and butter is really moving the wine through the system and wine sales. So other key people here at the winery, we have a president, a wonderful guy named Tony LeBlanc, who's the highest ranking non-family member in our organization and provides leadership and integration for our whole company and moving us forward and tackling the initiatives we need to. And then Charlie Campbell is our VP of National Sales, so he handles the wholesale channel for us. And then the lovely and fantastic Vivian Gay is our Director of International Sales. So she knows the London market, being from the UK. She knows the market over there quite well. And my role in this, I started here a little over almost a decade ago, not quite a decade. I think my 9th anniversary will be coming up this year. And Silver Oak has a unique history when it comes to production. So the original winemaker his name was Justin Meyer, and he was one of the founders. He founded this company alongside Ray Duncan, who is David and Tim's father. And he's just a character, a well-known Napa Valley and California wine figure. He had been a Christian brother. That's where he learned how to make wine and grow grapes. And when he was getting ready to retire about 25 years into his career, he hired a young man named Daniel Barron to be his successor for Silver Oak. So Justin retired officially probably in the early 2000s, unfortunately passed away not too long after. I think he passed away in 2003 or so. And Daniel also had a long and successful career with Silver Oak. So I was hired in 2014 as a succession plan for Daniel. So that means over the 50-year span of our winery, we've really only had 3 people sort of responsible for production at the top, which was quite a bit of pressure, but also a great honor and something I was really excited about. I grew up in the Napa Valley. My father was a winemaker. I've been around the wine business my whole life. And Silver Oak is really well known in the Valley as just being the place that people love to work. So people come and work here and they work their whole careers here. They retire and they never go anywhere else because it's just such a neat place to work and the family takes such great care of people. So the opportunity to come work here was pretty exciting for me. It was sort of like, Silver Oak hires a winemaker once every 25 years or so. So it doesn't come along all that often. So I made sure that they, at the very least, it was going to be really hard to say no to me when it came to hiring.
Amazing. And I'm, only sort of 3 or so interviews into this Napa Valley series, and it's great to start seeing the common threads and start seeing the themes coming out. And I think definitely the family owned wineries have sort of put themselves forward for this series, so that's definitely a theme. And then I think also just that that kind of close knit community as well. I mean, everyone that I've spoken to has sort of, stressed that it's not that big, and I guess that everybody knows everybody, and the sort of, multi-generational angle coming out, as I'm hearing from you as well. But I think, where I'd sort of broaden out the conversation, and it may well be the route into it is to sort of, take you back in time a little bit more. But I'm keen to explore a little bit, what's it like growing up there, and what's kind of the community like? Because, the sort of time scales that I'm hearing about when people are starting the wineries, when the industry, really kind of, I guess, had this kind of second coming, it's almost within, not quite my lifetime, but maybe my parents' lifetime. So it's really not that long ago. So, I'd really just, like to hear a bit more, kind of from you about, what's it like growing up there, and that culture angle really, which, I guess got its hooks into you and meant that you wanted to get into the industry.
Yeah, the history of California wine is really fascinating because it was a thriving industry before the turn of the century, before the turn of the 20th century. And then here in America, we had Prohibition, and it basically reset us, and we started from essentially zero in the 30s. So, the modern era of Napa Valley wine really starts with the building of Robert Mondavi Winery in the mid 60s and the opening of that. So, Silver Oak was not terribly far behind that. And it's a small agricultural community. I grew up in the town of St. Helena, which has a population of about 5,000. It's sort of in the heart of the valley. And my father was in the wine business. And I remember the smells. You grow up in these small communities, and you don't think twice when you hear a gondola full of, a few tons of grapes sort of bouncing down the street in the fall. Smells of fermentation and the pumice piles and things like that when I was growing up. And we didn't think much of it. We thought this was kind of how everybody grew up. And we used to play tag in some of the old head train Zinfandel vineyards and go out there to play hide and seek and stuff like that. So it really was quite special. But I'll say this, and the culture is really built around wine, food, and hospitality. So everybody is friendly, and this is part of what we do, right? The part of the culture that's a little bit might surprise you is it was far from a foregone conclusion that this was what I was going to do as a profession. So the one thing that's definitely true is if you grow up in the wine business in the Napa Valley, your first real goal is to get out and go do something different for a while. So I went to a college on the central coast of California, mostly because it was right on the beach and there was surfing and the weather was great. Really not sure what I was going to do with myself, but you sort of go through these. You mature as a person, you get a little bit older, and I guess I had that unfortunate realization at some point that I was going to have to actually get a job and work for a living. We were not independently wealthy, unfortunately. And the more I did that, the more I thought about what it was like to grow up here. I remember going to visit my dad at the winery during Crush and playing on forklifts, and he'd put me on hand carts and sort of roll me around and running around on the catwalks up above the tanks. And it was just kind of a really, really special way to grow up now that I look back at it. My first mentor was my father, and he was the first person I called when I sort of thought about doing this for a career. And so I after graduating from college, he sort of suggested, he said, look, the profession and the business isn't for everybody. There's people that really take to it and enjoy it. But if it's the kind of thing that you don't enjoy and it's not for you, you'll be miserable. So why don't you come, before you really jump off that cliff, why don't you come work a harvest seasonally for us and see if you really like it? And so my first harvest was 2002, working for him at Groth Vineyards or Groth Cellars at the time. And I just remember there was one night I was driving a tractor with a manure spreader on the back, sort of spreading out pumice at the end of the day one night. The sun was setting, and I had this feeling that I was exactly where I was supposed to be, doing exactly what I was supposed to do. So that was kind of it for me. And then I went over to New Zealand because of, the opportunity to work twice in a year, get 2 seasons in, was very, very attractive to me. In addition to the fact that I was young and I had no ties to anything, so why not travel and get out there a bit? And I met a guy who had a really big effect on my career. His name was Doug Weiser, and he was an American working in New Zealand. He'd gone there for opportunity. Had been suggested to him by his mentor that, this is kind of the Wild West. The California wine business, especially in Napa, is fairly well established now, but New Zealand is just finding their way in the world of wine. And he had a lot of ambition, really smart guy, very, 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 very talented. And I went to work for him, and what he sort of taught me was just the approach to doing what he did. So he was very, very dedicated. He understood the nuts and bolts of everything, how everything works. So he didn't have a lot to offer me in terms of, I was so green and I was so new that any sort of nuance around the craft and the profession would have been lost anyway. But just watching the way that he worked and the way that he interacted with the people around him and the way he approached his craft had a really big influence on me. It brought that back with me. I worked for a guy named James Hall for a while at Patson Hall, who was the founder and winemaker there. Really great guy. I think what he taught me was, again, understanding how things actually work so that you can sort of solve problems easily without making them even worse. And then he just had this approach where he just wanted to have fun in everything that he did. He was the owner, he was the winemaker. If we're going to be there 12 hours a day, we might as well have a really good time while we're doing it. Let's have a few laughs. Let's listen to some great music. Let's tell a few jokes. Yeah. There's no reason we have to be super serious about this all the time. So I think it's, take the craft very seriously, but don't take yourself very seriously at all is one thing that I learned from him. And I'd probably still be working for James if I hadn't gotten a few opportunities along the way. And then, Daniel Barron actually had a big effect on me too. We're very, very different people, which, almost comically so. He's from Long Island and I'm from California. I don't think I'd ever even been to New York when I first met him. He's kind of a free spirit where I tend to be a little bit more rigid and confined. But he really taught me about the way that Silver Oak does things and putting the brand and putting the history and putting kind of everything that's gone into what we are now, putting that above yourself and sort of subjugating your ego, so to speak. And really, Silver Oak is about the people that consume Silver Oak. It's not about me. It's not about Daniel. It's not even really about the Duncan family. It's about our customers and the people who really love it and their experience with the wine.
Really fascinating, and I'm super excited, and even more excited now that I'll be speaking with James Hall as part of a Sonoma series that I'm also doing at the moment. I'm putting together at the moment. So I'll definitely say hi to him for you and ask him about some of those experiences.
Don't ask him too much. I don't want him to say too much because we had a lot of fun.
Let's see. Yeah, we'll peel away some of the layers and see what we can get out of him. One thing, I think, one final thing on the culture side of things, there, Nate, which I think was particularly fascinating to me from the pre-interview questionnaire that you put together was this idea of the community being supportive and competitive. And I'll admit, in the sort of 4 or 5 years that I've been doing this, it's only really come up once or twice. It actually came up with a friend of mine who works for a New Zealand winery, and she was sort of saying that there's when you're sort of in certain settings, it will be very much we're all in the same boat, we're all Kiwis together, as it were, but then there comes that time when there does have to be that competitiveness, because you're in business at the end of the day. It's a wonderful business to be in, but it is a business. And I'm just, ask it in a very open way. I just love to hear, more about, what that means to you, that idea of being, both supportive, collaborative, but also competitive.
It's funny. It's, in general, there's only so many spots on the wine list. There's only so many spots on the shelf. So the sales side can be quite competitive just because there's limited capacity for the market too. There's only so many places to sell wine. But what I've also noticed with the sales staff is they run in the same circles a lot, so they actually tend to become close friends in many cases. And even when they're back home, when they're not on the road, they find time to get together for dinner and things like that. From the winemaking side, it's incredibly collaborative. I mean, probably in the last 2 weeks, I've gotten together with about 10 to 12 other people that do what I do, just to talk about things like sustainability and what's the next step in vineyards for really making our water conservation as good as it can be.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
What's the next step in mechanization? What we talk about big picture political issues around sustainability and conservation. We talk about sort of our individual experiences with different vineyards and individual winemaking techniques or things like that. And it's really just fascinating because they're just curious. They want to learn more, and they want to, especially once they get to a point in their career where they feel very comfortable that you kind of cross this threshold where you go from being self-conscious about not knowing everything to sort of wearing that as a badge of honor, that we're going to keep learning forever about what we do. We're never going to know everything about making wine and growing grapes. And so you cross this threshold where you start to really welcome other people's ideas and input, because it might be something that you haven't really thought about. You've got to get outside of the four walls of your own winery and really hear what they have to say. At the same time, we're all competitive people in the sense that we want to do well, we want to succeed. We certainly want to impress people with the wines that we make. But again, that's the best winemakers I've seen are people who can really they have that spirit. There's a guy that works for me who makes our Toomey wines, and I see it come out every now and then. He's got this really, really competitive side where if we're doing something like playing volleyball for fun at the end of the day or something like that, I can see his competitiveness come out. And if he's losing, it just drives him nuts. But he's able to sort of tamp that down and keep it under the wraps. And I really like working with people like that who are competitive and want to push the boundaries. They want to constantly improve. But as far as information flow, I love the collaborative nature of what we do. And even in something like sales, where it's there's dollars at stake, there's business at stake. I love to see that people actually, they develop these relationships and they cultivate them and keep them going as they run into each other all over the world from place to place.
Yeah, that's it. I mean, I think that there's loads and loads there that I could sort of speak to you about there, Nate. But I think the thing that I saw very recently was the state of the wine business report from Silicon Valley Bank, and I think just more and more that I see that, this idea that, is wine each other's competitor? I think, it's probably now been proven that, that's a way too simplistic way to view it. I think that we have to view beer, we have to view cider and, hard seltzer, which I think has had, a sort of a much bigger impact in the US than it has in the UK. But I think increasingly now, and at all ages, wine is competing with abstinence, which I think is this incredible trend that you see coming up, and it's at a certain age, maybe for expected reasons, but it's maybe certainly in my lifetime, it's a lot more unexpected at the younger age group, the sort of under 25s who are going towards abstinence in many ways. And I think that's also, maybe it's those forces as well that actually go to show that actually competitive, fine, but collaboration is probably more important at this particular time.
Yeah, it's interesting. The substitutions have always been around. We've always dealt with, although everything feels new. We had wine coolers, we had Zima, we've had all sorts of things. Even before it was legal, we had cannabis as a potential substitution. But you're absolutely right that one thing we had not really experienced as a substitution was temperance. So it's we'll see how that one works out. I think there's always been this idea that the next generation is not picking up wine early enough. There's always a lot of consternation and worry, and at least in my career, they always come around. My generation was part of it early on, then the millennials, and now the millennials are starting to drink more wine. I think it's just a a gradual progression through one's life and interaction with both the finer things in life and luxury, as well as just alcoholic beverages in general. And we'll see how the temperance part goes, but the rest I don't get too worked up about. But we do, as an industry, as a collaborative industry, we're headed Grape and Wine Symposium today, and there's going to be about 15,000 people there, all in the grape growing and wine business, and we all want to bring them back from the White Claws and the High Noons of the world into drinking wine. So we all are in the same boat there for sure. I think all of us would prefer they drink our wine rather than our neighbor's wine or our friend's wine, but bringing them into the fold is the first step.
Yeah, these are topics that are very dear to my heart, and I could very much talk about these for the whole time. But there's something that I'm really excited as well by this series is because I'm yet to have the pleasure to visit visit California, but only Los Angeles. I've never been properly out into wine country, so it's really to ask people who are there, who've got their feet in the soil, as it were, and in your case, Nate has grown up there, really to orientate us to where you are, and I think what might make sense is to maybe talk about that in terms of, I guess, those different AVAs as well, maybe giving that kind of high level view of where you are, and indeed where you're sourcing fruit from. Right down to what's it like kind of when you step outside and, take a walk or, take a drive around the property, right now in January 2023. Yeah.
So, again, sometimes I have to pinch myself. I have the good fortune I'm sitting in my office in Oakville right now, and Oakville, to situate you, is literally our Oakville winery is in the middle of the valley from a north-south perspective, and also essentially right smack dab in the middle of the valley from an east-west. So if I look to my west out my window, I'm looking at the Mayacamas mountain range and the Sleeping Lady, which is sort of a local legend about a princess that lay down in the Mayacamas range, and you can see her outline if you look closely during sunset. And there's actually a vineyard that we work with down near Yountville called the Sleeping Lady Vineyard for that reason. But that's a legend that I heard growing up, came from the native people that lived here long before we did. And then I look to my east, and we've got the Vaca Mountain Range, and they're very different looking perspectives, because we have a lot of the Vaca Mountain Range it gets the morning sun, it gets a lot hotter, so it's a much more sparse sort of native vegetation. There's a lot of chaparral and scrub brush. You look to the west, to the Mayacamas Range, we have a lot of conifers and evergreen trees. And then I'm sitting right here in the middle where the Napa River flows, and it's flowing quite well right now. After about, probably 10 days of rain, that gave us about a foot of rain, which is something we haven't seen for a number of years. But if you drove around now and you went to the vineyards that we farm and the vineyards that we buy fruit from, which mostly for us range from St. Helena. St. Helena is about 10 minutes north of where I'm sitting right now. And that's generally about as far north as we go to source Bordeaux varieties. We grow a little bit of white up in Calistoga for the Toomey Sauvignon Blanc. But right now, everything is dormant. The leaves have fallen. In many cases, we've started to pre-prune. So there is a little bit of neatness to a lot of the vineyards right now, but not all the fine pruning has been done yet. We're starting to do that. And that's actually my favorite time of year is just before bud break, after things have been pruned. There's something really cathartic about the process of pruning. You can put your earbuds in. It's a thoughtful process, and it's an intellectual process, but it can be somewhat rote and automatic, which actually I find to be really, really cathartic and almost Zen-like. And the vineyards they look so prim and proper, and they look, I don't have much hair anymore, but my kids, when they go to get a haircut, when they come back from the barber, you look at them and they go, that's what you should look like all the time. and the vines look, it's the first step in the new season, and it plays a huge role in the crop for this coming year and the future of the vine and the longevity of the vine. And so while it's kind of an afterthought to a lot of people, it's one of the most important things we do. And there's that anticipation of we're just waiting for bud break to come, and then we're going to hit the ground running once we get the growing season going. So I actually love this time of year. It's green, it's lush, which lasts for us usually till about June, and then it starts to turn amber and gold as the vegetation dries out. And it's almost like there's no real slow times for us anymore. But this time of year, before the growing season starts, it's as close as we get to a period where the vineyard team can kind of take their foot off the gas and sit back and relax for a little while.
Amazing. Yeah. And I think, the natural mirror really to that story, Nate, is to ask you to talk a bit to the geology, because I think that, that's, for me as well, that was really what got me excited when I first started drinking wine was that idea that what you see is half or probably less than half of the picture that's going on, and that you've got these wonderful vines that are doing all of this work to kind of draw up and to bring back all of that information from beneath the soil, and they're giving us a clue about what's going on down there. But yeah, I'm just curious, again, based on where you are and potentially where you're sourcing from, what are maybe some of the larger and longer term activities and influences that have shaped that world beneath us, if you like.
California geology is absolutely fascinating. So one of the first things I did when I got into the wine business and I started to understand the role that geology plays, I bought a few little guidebooks that as you drive around California, it sort of tells you what you're looking at. And, California, we had the highest point in the continental U.S., which is Mount Whitney. And we also have the lowest point, which is Death Valley. And they're about 70 miles from one another, which is kind of a mind-blowing statistics when you think about the size of the United States and the amount of coverage there is. And it has everything to do with our location here on the West Coast, on the Pacific Rim, and the Ring of Fire, as it's called. Mm-hmm. And so the end result of all those processes that have happened with the plate movement over hundreds of millions of years and so on, and the recession of the ocean from, at one point the west coast of the United States was probably somewhere around Utah or Idaho. So the recession of that ocean and the uplifting of all the Sierra Nevada mountain ranges and the Cascade mountain ranges, the end result is it's this hodgepodge of geology. And, geology, of course, is important because soil is essentially, it comes from geology. The parent material is geologic forces, and then the weathering of that is what we actually grow the grapes in with a few exceptions for wind-blown soils and things like that. And so the really interesting thing about Napa Valley is that there's so much diversity to the soils because there's so much diversity to where these rocks came from. We have sedimentary rocks on Mount Veeder, sedimentary meaning at one point they were at the bottom of the ocean. They're up at 1,500 feet on Mount Veeder, and trying to unravel the story of how they got there and what those processes were is to me is always fascinating. It does create a lot of challenges for us as grape growers because we have to respond to the environment that we have and the soil we might be working with here. You could probably hit a golf ball and encounter something completely different wherever that golf ball lands within the same vineyard. But our most important vineyards are two estate vineyards here in the Napa Valley. We have the Soda Canyon Branch, which was a big part of our Premier Napa Valley lot for this year, which is at the base of Atlas Peak and kind of the rolling back of foothills, as well as our Jump Rock Vineyard, which is on the top of Atlas Peak, right next to the Stagecoach Vineyard. And Jump Rock is a very easy story. Atlas Peak in general is one big volcanic rock. It's the big red core stones that you can imagine that are the size of like a Volkswagen Bug. That's where you find those up on Atlas Peak. So there's never much mystery as to what the source of the soils up on Atlas Peak are. Soda Canyon is a little bit more diverse in the sense that because it's in the foothills and it's rolling topography and we have valleys and gullies and and things like that. The soil can vary a touch in terms of texture. So when we talk about soil texture, we're talking about the ratios of sand, silt, and clay, and the texture sort of informs the water holding capacity. Mostly is the big clue with the amount of clay in the soil. And so depending on where on the property you are and how the water has moved over millennia, and how close you are to the little creek there, we have differences in the amount of clay in the soil, which changes our water holding capacity. Mm-hmm. Most of those soils are still volcanic in origin. We have a little bit of metamorphic soil. In the three classes of sort of geology, we have igneous or volcanic, we have sedimentary, which was at the bottom of the ocean at one point, and then we have metamorphic, which kind of catches everything else. Metamorphic is sort of those two types that have been changed either by pressure or heat or many different forces, or stuff that just doesn't fit at all. And the metamorphic is usually kind of the interesting stuff to deal with and can be the challenge. So we have a small part of our Soda Canyon Ranch vineyard where magnesium can be a big challenge to the plants. And then there's also compressed volcanic ash, compressed rhyolitic ash, which is very common here. Creates this really interesting sort of white-colored, almost moon dust type soil that is sort of fascinating to deal with.
Again, there's an absolute ton there that we could get into. I mean, I think hearing the origins and hearing all about those different forces that have shaped that, I'm sure, beautiful landscape. Are I think fascinating in themselves. But I think given the topic that we're talking about here, we've got a great segue. Before we get to talking about wine and how the wine is made, is actually talking about the viticulture, because it sounds as though, therefore, that hodgepodge of soils that's going on there, the different elevations, you have a challenge in terms of how to treat the vines, and then that's without even considering the interaction of different grape varieties and clonal varieties. But maybe to kind of paint us a picture of that link between having the soils that you've got there and growing great grapes that are going to go on to make great wine.
Yeah, I think we talked a little bit earlier in the podcast about the ability to kind of subjugate and accept that you don't know everything. Mm-hmm. And I think, when it comes to viticulture and dealing with soil, the soil's been there for a lot longer than we have. It took a long time to get the way it is. And so the sooner you accept that you're not going to be able to change it to any great degree, the better off you're going to be. And then your challenge or your mission becomes respond to it and make it the very best that you possibly can. So, I think when you're planting a new vineyard, I think the one decision that gets overlooked a lot when people talk about viticulture and we love to talk about variety, we love to talk about pruning and trellising and things like that. But rootstock selection is probably the most important decision we make when it comes to designing a vineyard and putting it in. And I think also, retaining the right services of a really qualified and competent soil scientist is a huge part of that. So getting the right people into those pits and taking a look at what's going on and helping you decide what rootstock will really perform well there. It's almost like the scion material and the variety is essentially secondary when it comes to that. So, I think what makes a vineyard, what makes it valuable, what this Duncan family invests in is the soil. And so I think over the last 10 to 15 years, we've really come to understand that the soil is really what it's all about. It's really what we're trying to protect. I think Napa County realized that a long time ago when they started to talk about erosion control and really thinking thoughtfully about how to, as an industry, work on that. But we've also gotten really interested in soil health and quantifying that, starting to get away from tillage in the places that we can. In some places, tillage actually is really important for soil and keeping it healthy and non-compacted and producing well. But otherwise, everywhere we can, the lack of tillage helps create structure. It helps create water holding capacity. And one of the more important things we've done recently is start to get away from herbicides. So for the under the vine berm, We especially in places where vigor can be a challenge and we don't have enough vigor, we want to limit competition and not overdo it. We don't want vines to grow like weeds and grow a hedge. That's not really what we're after, but we do need enough leaf area to ripen the crop. There's always that balance between the amount of photosynthesis the plant's doing and how much crop it's using that photosynthesis to ripen. And so, places where we want to control weeds, we've gotten away from synthetic herbicides and we're starting to do more and more mechanical weed control. And I think the really interesting thing is the future. Now that we've sort of decided that that's where we want to go, we don't want to use herbicides if we can avoid it, for sort of last resort. How do we do mechanical weed control sustainably? And there's this new push now for with all the new technology coming out for self-driving cars and electric cars. There's now this new technology of people pushing electric tractors that are autonomously driven, and I have this dream of us, putting these tractors to work in these vineyards and turning them loose at night and coming in the morning, and 10 acres have been weeded for us, and we plug it back in and let it go the next night. So I think the really fascinating stuff in my mind is happening in the vineyards right now as far as technology and pushing that conversation forward.
As I promised, I would get us talking about the wines as well. But I think that given that we're sat here, really just in the lead up really to Premier Napa 2023, I'd really just invite you to take us inside what that means to you, really. That as an event, but then also what that means in terms of your production and also in the sort of 2 weeks or so leading up to the event as we are sat here now.
I have always enjoyed the event. It's one of my favorite every year. Part of the reason is some of our sales staff will come in from the road and join us, so we don't always get to see them around the winery. So it is always nice to see them. And there's very few events where so much of the industry gets together in one place. We run across our peers and friends at the grocery store or at the kids' soccer game or whatever. But Premier is actually a chance for us to see everybody all in one place and really catch up and say hi. And then the energy of the auction to me is always a lot of fun. I don't really get nervous a lot anymore. I do get nervous right before the Premier Napa Valley auction. I feel like I'm being graded and judged, and I get a little bit nervous and competitive there. So it's actually a nice feeling. I get the butterflies, so to speak. But when it comes to creating the wine, it's a lot of fun for our winemaking team. So our Napa Valley winemaker, whose name is Laura Oskorik here, and I work together on the blends. And we make, Silver Oak Napa Valley, we make anywhere from 25 to 30,000 cases most vintages, and we make a single wine. And there are constraints. So while we might absolutely adore a certain wine, it's only so much volume, right? It's going to make part of the blend. It's not going to be the base of the blend. We're constrained by what we actually grow and make. And then for Premier Napa Valley, the creativity is wide open. So because we only make a barrel and sell 20 cases, we can do pretty much whatever we want and use the wines we really want to, because in almost every case we have more than enough wine to use in whatever proportion we want. So it's really a chance it's one of the few cases in which we get to sit back and say, what do we want this wine to be? And so that's actually a really interesting intellectual question. And it can present a lot of challenges to a blending session. And so Laura and I, we have a few criteria. One is, the Silver Oak wines are aged for a very long time. They're aged for 2 years in barrel and then 2 years in bottle before they're released. But for Premier Napa Valley, we do need to make a wine that's going to show well. We blended a 2021 Cabernet for this session that's coming up in February. So that's, the 2021 Cabernet is not even going to be bottled until next summer, the summer of 2024. So it's a little bit different, different part of the brain to use to create something that's going to show well this coming February. So we do need to take that into account. And then we do, we're competitive. We want to show off a little bit. We want everybody to taste our wine and say, wow, that was one of the best wines in this whole tasting. But it does have to be reflective of Silver Oak, which has a very unique, a very consistent, a very, iconic sort of style to it. And the way we accomplish that is we use, of course, our American oak barrels, which are part of Silver Oak's history and have been from the very beginning. And really does set us aside when it comes to the whole lineup at Premier Napa Valley. It's Silver Oak, when you taste it, especially when it's that young and that early, if you walked through and tasted all 200 wines, it would definitely stand out as something different in that lineup.
A huge thanks to Nate Weis of Silver Oak Cellars. Do be sure to visit silveroak.com, where you can learn more about the winery and find their main social media handles. Please help to amplify this episode and the series by sharing the direct link, which is interpretingwine.com/491. You can find links to all episodes from the series in the description below. And I'd love to have you following along with me on social media, where I'm at Interpreting Wine on Instagram and Facebook, and at Wine Podcast on Twitter. Next time on the Interpreting Wine Napa Valley special series in episode 492, I'll be speaking with Ray Signorello of Signorello Estate. So make sure you're subscribed to the podcast to be alerted when the episode goes live. See you then.